Did you know that the famous Republic of Venice didn't start out in Venice? When the Romans said Venetia, they meant the whole northeast region of the Italian peninsula. It was only much later that Venezia, Venice, came to indicate only the city. When you stroll around in Venice today, you might not be aware of its very modest history. It may look like a city built by some very rich king or emperor from old. The truth is that the famous city we know today started out with a bunch of simple farmers, fishers, and trappers from tiny communities scattered across and around the muddy waters of the lagoon. Places like Altino, Torcello, Caorle, Heraclia, Malamocco, and Rialto slowly came together to form the Republic of Venice. And the big reason why these small cities started collaborating and why the people started to move out into the shallow lagoon in the first place was, of course, the barbarian invasions. But let's start from the beginning with the Roman Empire. Northern Italy was full of busy towns, farms, and trade routes. One of the biggest cities in the area was Altino, just a few miles to the north of today's Venice airport. It was a wealthy Roman town connected to the sea by canals. But around the 400 CE, things started deteriorating. The Roman Empire was weakening, and the Huns, the Goths, the Lombards, and others invaded from the north. Imagine living in a town where every few years a new army shows up, burns your crops, kills your family, and takes whatever you have left. And when difficulties pile up, something has to change. So people started looking for a safer place. And where did they go? Into the lagoon, an area full of shallow water, mudflats, and tiny islands. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hard for invaders on horseback to follow them out there. And the lagoon wasn't just a wasteland, it was a rather prosperous territory with rich fishing and hunting, as well as a lucrative salt industry. Altino was the big city everyone fled from. When the Huns attacked in 452 CE, they sacked the city, and many families grabbed what they could and escaped into the lagoon. They didn't go very far, though. They settled on islands like Torcello, which at the time functioned as the harbor of Altino, further down the river Sile. It was close enough to Altino to keep trading, but far enough to be reasonably safe. These refugees brought all of their skills, their tools, their traditions with their church leaders with them. In a way, Altino didn't disappear, it just moved. Torcello became one of the first major lagoon communities. Think of it as an early Venice. By the 500s and 600s, Torcello had a cathedral, a bishop, a growing population, the salt production, and trade connections with the rest of the Adriatic Sea through the Byzantine Empire, the East Roman Empire, which acted as a sort of big brother to the Venetians. Some historians think Torcello may have had as many as 10,000 people, way more than early Venice itself. It was a real town, not just a refugee camp. But Torcello wasn't the only place growing. The raids from the invaders pushed the inland Venetians towards the sea, towards the southeast. 35 miles to the east of Venice was Caorle, known in ancient time as Caprulae. It sat on the coast halfway between the sea and the lagoon islands. The coastline was different in those days. It was less land and more swamp. In fact, you could travel by boat from Venice all the way to Grado without ever leaving the lagoons. In that environment, Caorle became a kind of front door to the lagoon world, a guardian for the hidden waters behind it. It was never the capital of the Republic, but it played an important role in connecting the lagoon communities to the Adriatic Sea. And the sea was the lifeline they needed for survival. The sea connected them to trading partners and to the muscles of the Byzantines. And now back to the beginning statement of this video. The first capital of what would become the Venetian Republic wasn't Venice. It was Heraclia, near the modern town of Jesolo, 20 miles northeast of Venice. Heraclia was founded by refugees from several mainland towns. It became the political center of the lagoon. The very first doge was seated there, and leaders from the surrounding settlements met with him to organize defense, manage trade, and deal with the Byzantine Empire, which still claimed authority over the region. And it was huge. Some estimates claim as many as 90,000 people lived there at its peak. Heraclia was where the lagoon communities first started acting like a united group instead of scattered villages. As the threat from the barbarians grew, the capital moved again, this time to an even more remote location, to the Lido island outside today's Venice. They settled at Metamauco, later called Malamocco. The spot had a few big advantages. It controlled one of the main entrances from the sea into the lagoon, and it was heavily defended. There were quite a few disagreements within the Republic. Some wanted to negotiate with the occupying power, while others were loyal to Constantinople. In 742, Teodato became the new Doge. His government focused on resolving tension between the different settlements and create some sort of autonomy from Constantinople. A few years later, in 751, the latest of the barbarians, the Franks, who were actually not very barbaric but pretty well organized and capable anyway, they captured the former Western Roman capital, Ravenna, some 90 miles south of Venice. And with Ravenna as a base, they were suddenly much more powerful in sea warfare. And Metamauco was right there on the Adriatic Sea, vulnerable to storms and shifting sands, but now also potentially exposed to the Frankish fleet. So, finally we get to Rialto, the group of islands in the middle of the lagoon that would become Venice. At first, Rialto wasn't at all the biggest or most natural settlement. Building on Rialto meant practically building right on the water, where there was nothing to build upon. But it had something the other settlements didn't have, namely excellent natural protection. Now, as attacks could come not only from inland, but also from the sea, it made perfect sense. Surrounded by water, hidden deep inside the lagoon and connected by narrow channels, Rialto was almost impossible for invaders to reach. From land, the horses and soldiers would get stuck in the mud. From the sea, the ships would run aground if they didn't know exactly where to go, and the Venetians kept their network of secret canals well hidden. By the 800s, more and more people moved to Rialto. The Doge's palace was built there, St. Mark's Basilica followed, trade routes expanded, and slowly the center of gravity shifted. In 775, the bishop's seat was moved to Venice, and in 810, all the rest of the administration also moved there. After that, the city was never contested as the natural capital of the Republic. So, why did Venice become the final capital instead of Torcello or Heraclia? Well, it's synthesized into one word: safety. The lagoon acted like a giant natural fortress. Invaders could burn cities on the mainland, but they couldn't easily reach the islands in the middle of the swamp. The people of the lagoon realized that the safest place to build the capital for the Republic to last 1,000 years was right in the middle of the water, in the mud. The Venice we know today didn't appear overnight. It was a slow and gradual process, initiated by fear and a struggle for survival, pushed on by creativity and exceptional teamwork. It started in places like Torcello, Heraclia, and Malamocco, each one of these adding some important aspect of what it means to live where maybe you're not really supposed to. When you walk through Venice today, you're walking through the final chapter of a long story that began with a few refugees just trying to stay alive. And to do that, they built a marvelous city in one of the most unlikely places on Earth.